You are watching DHTV, the television program service of California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Welcome to California State University, Dominguez Hills. This is Political Science 335, and I'm Hamoud Salhi. For the next 15 weeks, we'll be meeting you on this channel. We'll have a Professor Zaman Stanizai, who's going to join us, and he'll be answering questions or discussing the current American foreign policy in Afghanistan, in Asia, and other issues of importance in international politics. Stanizai has published extensively in Afghan politics and other international political issues, and it will be an honor to have him on this program. Let me ask a question that you want me to ask. The two-state solution, is that a viable solution? You see it at this point between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that the two-state solution, long advocated in Oslo, and is it still a good, is it a possibility? Is it a viable solution at this point?
Well, the way I look at it, I think the problem mainly is that Israel is a state that's modeled after a European state, a segregated state, an exclusionary state, a state in the name of an ethnic group or in the name of a religious group. Middle Eastern states do not have this, this European characteristic. Muslim states, or the ones that are Muslim majority, they are states that are not exclusive to any particular group. So therefore you could have ethnic minorities or majorities, but the exclusion part is what causes a problem. I think that if we...
Let me interject that. But you have certain kind of exclusion. For example, the Saudis, if you are part of the royal family, you are in the state. But how is that different from saying all the Jews have their own states? Is that
No, the Saudis might have a privileged class.
Privilege, okay.
That's different than having an exclusionary, like a Jewish state, which is just supposedly, at least by definition, just for the Jews. And on the same principle, I'm against any state, that's my personal philosophy, any state that's exclusive for any particular ethnic, religious, or other group in that way. Because the human societies in general are not necessarily segregated. They are because in the European model, when you go on the basis of European nationalism is nothing but racism that is politically endorsed and becomes the official policy. Now, if they wanted to have a state like that, the European model state in Europe, that would have been fine. Because, say, at least in principle, all the French would have been French and all the English would have been English, and there would have been a state for all the Jews. That would have been a European model in Europe. If they wanted to have a European, a non-European model, a Middle Eastern model state in the Middle East, then it had to have been inclusive for all parties concerned. So and that's where the problem is, that it's not so much that one is a Jewish state, the other one is an Arab state or a Palestinian state. Those are politically defined states out of the necessity of creating a European model state in a non-European environment.
So that aside, then, how does that link to the two-state solution? Okay, the Jews ones
had this, if we had the Middle Eastern model, it wouldn't have mattered whether the population was majority Jewish or majority Muslim or majority Christian.
That everybody will be
exactly, because the state would have been defined, and this state would have had many ethnic components to it, just like every other state. And there is no state in the Middle East or in the Muslim world in general. Take Iraq, for example. We are trying to apply the European model now to Iraq, create a Shia Iraq, create a Sunni Iraq, and create a Kurdish Iraq, which is simply at one level is divide and conquer, but another level it's segregating society at the very basis of it, which is very, very destructive. And I think if we have one state in the Middle East, say Palestine, Israel, whatever the name might be, in which there is no privileged class like the Saudis, the Saudi royal family in Saudi Arabia, or the Jews in the state of Israel. They are privileged compared to their non-Jewish citizens. So if you had a state like that, the whole question of one state and two state would be irrelevant, because you would have one state, all citizens will be equally responsible and equal participants in the political process, regardless of what religion they want. But the problem now is that they want an exclusive state, and this is mostly bad for the Jewish concept, because historically Jews have suffered for centuries because of this exclusion policy, primarily in Europe. They were excluded. And now for a Jewish state to come and adopt the very same policy, which hinder their progress, which discriminate against them, and use that policy against another people, that's where the problem is.
Okay. Let me move a little bit. We'll come back to this subject another time, and I'm sure we'll just head in depth. We just saw a clip about what's happening in Syria. What do you think is this a situation where the Security Council, the United States, is expected to go in and do the same thing they did in Libya?
If you read my article on Libya, I think you would understand what my position is.
I should have read it.
Which is on my website for the readers to
That's
consult.
A good plug, yeah.
Here's the problem. The Arab Spring, it's a wonderful idea, long overdue. However, when the spring comes, instead of allowing the trees and the grass and the plants and the vegetations to grow naturally in its own environment, to bring about the changes that are the people's demands, which will make it legitimate, we interfere. We want to, the United States, for instance, want to have, okay, if Assad's regime is gone, they want to make sure that the next regime that comes is friendly to the United States.
Those are the conditions.
And even if that friendliness would be illegitimate, in the sense that if such a regime would prioritize American interests vis-a-vis the interest of its own people, which has been the case in most Middle Eastern states, where American allies prioritize American interest over the interest of their own people, and in that sense make them, those states become illegitimate. So if we allow any state, and in this case Syria, to bloom and blossom in its own right way, create its own government that will be representative of its own people, which is what a democracy ought to be, then that would be fine. But the thing is that we have so many chefs who jump into this kitchen, and they want to make sure that I wouldn't mention the animal, whatever food is being cooked is cooked based on their taste. That's the external factors. And so that's why, in a way, we are hindering the process of the Arab Spring, and we are preventing the creation of legitimate governments, and we are more interested in creating proxies for our foreign policy interest, instead of allowing people to have their own governments, which, if we use the American motto, should be a government of the people, for the people, and by the people.
Let me remind our viewers to call us with a question or a comment, or to email us. My guest is Dr. Zaman Stanizai. But are you telling us that actually what happened in Syria, what's happened in Egypt, what happened in Libya and in Tunisia, that all those leaders that came prioritize American interests at the expense of their national interests?
I don't think there's anything wrong for a government, say in Egypt, that accommodates its foreign policy vis-a-vis the United States. After all, foreign diplomacy is the name of the game. All governments do that, and that's legitimate. The point is that when a revolution in progress is hijacked to affect the consequence of it, primarily on the basis of the interests of a foreign power, then that government is not legitimate. In Egypt, what we had was the United States made several attempts, step by step. And every time they tried to prevent one stage, it moved on to the next one, to the next one. In each case, we wanted to, in a sense, to have a government in Egypt that would be friendly to the United States and friendly to Israel, as if a government that would be legitimate in terms of its own people should of necessity be opposed to the state of Israel or opposed to it, which I don't think is the case.
How do you assess the current or the U.S. relationship towards the current Egyptian President Morsi? Do you see it as a friendly relationship, or is it more of an is it at that alliance level?
It's an alliance of necessity, because in the West in general and in the United States in particular, any political party that has the word Islam or Islamic attached to it is automatically blacklisted. And of course, they would react towards that one way or another. In the case of the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, first, every effort was made to blame the revolution on them in a way that they are responsible for the chaos and mayhem. And the Muslim Brotherhood did the smartest thing by staying on the sideline pretty much in the earlier stage of the revolution, and people were saying like, how come they are collaborating with the militarist? The point is that they didn't want to take the blame because they felt that they were targeted. So that was a good thing on the part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Later, when they came to power, slowly the United States position was to accept them hesitantly. But remember, when the parliamentary elections were conducted, they won the majority. We should have accepted that. Well, we accepted it with reservation. Then came the presidential election. But the presidential election results were held for, I think, at least 5 days. They were not announced. And then here was the tricky part of it, is that they were not ready to accept a Muslim Brotherhood president with a Muslim Brotherhood parliament in Egypt, which would have meant that they would really have been more independent, and they would not have relied on the United States so much. What they did was that they said, I wasn't in the inner circles, but one assumes that perhaps a conversation similar to this took place, that, well, okay, let them have the presidency, but take the parliament back, which is what happened. Is that the parliament, which was the most legitimate based on foreign observers looking at the whole process, that legitimate parliament, a representative of the people of Egypt, was denied to the people of Egypt. Why? Because they also elected a Muslim Brotherhood president. And that is just like, to speak through analogy, is that if we say if the U.S. presidency is won by a Democratic Barack Obama, then let's take the Senate back from the Democrats, because we can't let them have both, which is what we really did.
We have a question. Just coming on the internet. Isn't that what ultimately happened in the United States elections? The right-wing plan did not work, with the exception.
The difference is that Egypt is not the United States. The United States may mess up its own election, whether it's the Supreme Court decree declaring one candidate a president as opposed to the other. It's our own internal mess. What happened in Egypt was that from the Egyptian perspective, everything went according to plan. There was no problem. The problem was sort of imposed from outside. And so perhaps not until they got commitments from the Egyptian president that, okay, we will let you become the president, but you have to be nice to Israel, which is a presumption like, why would it not be in the interest of Egypt itself to have a friendly relationship with Israel? Because I think they are in the region, they are neighbors. The necessity demands that they be friendly without this policy being dictated to them from outside.
Before we move to another topic, just remind our viewers to call us with any questions You raise a very, very important question, the viability of the two-state solution. And the alternative is to have a state that everybody will feel they are represented. But I'd like to take you to Afghanistan. There is a clip, just to remind the studio, is the clip number 7. This clip talks about or shows progress, how the reintegration of those who were taken to jail, how they are reintegrated in the Afghan society, or some of the problems that the Afghan population is facing. I know you wrote about a third alternative in Afghanistan. I read that article, so I may not have read the Arab Spring, but I read the
well, it's possible I may have forgotten what I have written myself.
Well, let's watch the clip.
Abdul Sattar should have plenty of time to finish the elaborate work he's doing. He's in jail for 16 years for drug dealing. There are murderers and kidnappers in the embroidery class too. Punishment fits the crime in the outdoor workshop where the bikes being rebuilt were worn out by a team destroying fields of opium poppies. The foreman is an ex-Taliban fighter, Abdul Ghani.
When I was in the Taliban, there was a lot of fighting, but it was all for nothing.
It is visiting day and families are carefully searched as they enter the jail. Prisoners can share a few minutes of human warmth through the cold bars of their cell. Until only 4 years ago, this was a wild and dangerous place where prisoners often attacked the staff. That's changed, and the reforms are changing the lives of those who end up in what's still a place of punishment.
Through the processes that we put in, it is about tackling and de-radicalising these prisoners so that when we release them, hopefully they will divert them away from the criminal insurgent-related activity.
Afghanistan has a reputation for brutality in treating its prisoners, so this is a really surprising place. And it has a counter-Taliban strategy too, in encouraging ex-prisoners not to go back to the insurgency. A small group of women prisoners live with their children, secluded from the male side of the jail. About half of the women in prison in Afghanistan are there for what's called running away, arrested after fleeing from violent or abusive husbands. One says she was married as a child to a violent man who mistreated her. Another was forced to go through a wedding even after her future husband had shot her brother. She ran away when he was violent to her. Life for many women in many parts of Afghanistan remains precarious, with some safer behind prison walls. David Loyne, BBC News.
Welcome back to Dominguez Hills. That was a clip from BBC. What do you think, Dr. Stanizai? What's your reaction? This idea of rehabilitating prisoners and making them good sort of citizens in a sense. What's happening inside Afghanistan in terms of this policy or this idea of rehabilitating?
I think the problem started back in the Soviets' day. Which was when they had a policy of quote-unquote Afghanization. And the idea was that to internalize the war in Afghanistan, to create a civil war that wasn't there in the first place, so that when the Soviets leave Afghanistan, they will not be followed to Central Asia. And the result of that was that the ethnic element was introduced after the first 10 years when nobody talked about ethnicity. Everybody talked about the national jihad, the national resistance against the Soviet occupation. With the Soviet departure, the element of national resistance was changed to defense of the rights of the ethnic minorities. Which was a hoax in the real sense, in that in Afghanistan, yes, there were ethnic minorities, but the government was fully participatory for centuries, and all classes, all ethnic groups participated proportionately. perhaps some not so proportionately.
This is prior to the...
This is prior to the Soviet departure.
Okay.
Now,
in 1989.
In 1989.
Yeah.
Now, with the U.S. invasion, they took the same blueprint and used the same policy of supporting the minorities against the ethnic majority in a way to give it a kind of the appearance of a legitimate struggle. The truth of the matter is that the Taliban, which was a group that was of ethnically speaking, they were majority Pashtuns, but it was the only political group that was not exclusively ethnic. The minority groups were exclusively ethnic. If it was a Hazara party, it was only for Hazaras. If it was an Uzbek, only for Uzbeks. The Taliban party was the only one that was not exclusively Pashtuns. It was predominantly Pashtun, yes, but it was not exclusively.
Was that because it had more of a religious tendencies, that religions appear to all groups, or was it just came as a natural process?
No, that is, I think, a natural trend in most societies, that the ethnic majority in every group has to act in a sense to accept the exclusion.
Okay.
I mean, like in the United States, we have the ethnic whites who have participated in supporting Jewish rights. They have participated in supporting civil rights for the African Americans. They are participating in, they're helping the Hispanics, the blacks, all the other groups. And these are primarily white ethnic Americans. And they cannot afford, a majority in any society cannot afford to behave exclusively for their own interest, because that would appear racist. Now, the Taliban, out of that necessity, since the Pashtun are the majority, I don't know if this was of any religious conviction, but it may have been. But my observation is in any society, the majority acts like a majority.
There was some practical thing. I mean, it was, after all, the Taliban that was viewed as the harboring terrorism, anti-US. The Northern Alliance represented the minority. It became sort of the ultimate friend. Or
there was not a single political party in Afghanistan that did not have foreign patronage. Whether it was the United States, whether it was Central Asia, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, all of them had, in a way, a dog in this fight. So that was there. But the problem, to get back to where the situation is now, Afghanistan now is a society that has been in a perpetual war for 35 years. So the problems that we observed here, what is happening to the women, what is happening...
1980, the Soviet invasion.
Right, from 1979 on. So it was the first communist government, and then the Soviet invasion, and then the hiatus between the two invasions, and then the American invasion. So this war has been going on for a long time, and it has been targeting one or another group in a way to, like I said, to internalize, to Afghanize the conflict. So what we have done as Americans, I'm speaking in terms of the American foreign policy, is that we went to Afghanistan claiming that we are fighting Al-Qaeda. Once we realized there is not so much of an Al-Qaeda there, we transferred the blame to the Taliban. And once the Taliban government fell, we transferred that blame to the entire Pashtun population. So instead of, because somehow in a warrior culture that American culture is, we cannot live without an enemy. So instead of saying, okay, there was an enemy, it was eliminated, now we can go to a normal state, a normalcy. For us, the normalcy was simply transferring the blame and finding a new target, blaming it on a new group, and dealing with them that way. There would be no need for reintegration of most of these people that the clip showed if we had not disenfranchised them in the first place. So we disenfranchised them, targeted them, because we needed the support of the minorities from the north to fight their own brothers, the majority in the south. And now we are saying, okay, we need to reintegrate them back into the society. But the point is, why do the wrong thing in the first place? But that's the nature of things as is.
We have a couple questions coming. This is from, okay, I think I got it. I think this is about the Pakistani girl shot in the head by the Taliban for promoting girls' education, has been released from a Birmingham hospital to live with her family, doctors said Friday. I guess the question is, what's your reaction to that?
It's a very shameful thing for this to have happened, and her picture is on the front page of my Pashto website.
Yeah.
A beautiful woman a young girl who went through her own struggle to ask for nothing but that which is the legitimate right of every human being, and in the context of an Islamic society is that which is the command of the Quran, which says knowledge is incumbent upon every Muslim man and woman. So she was doing, to speak their language, she was doing her Islamic duty of educating herself. Now, what has happened in the Pakistani society, especially among the Pashtun ethnic minority in Pakistan, is that they have become the scapegoat for the Pakistani policy, state policy, as well as for the United States.
Yeah.
So that targeting I was talking about Afghanistan, targeting the Pashtuns, has extended to targeting Pashtuns in Pakistan too. And that's why when the conflict was defined as an AFPAC, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the idea was that the target group had to be the Pashtuns because they are on the border between the two countries.
Let's see, Mike also has a few questions, is the one who brought the question. So if the Taliban can't afford to act only in their own interest, what value was there in shooting the girl for simply wanting to go to school? Seems like their policy imploded on the due to get world attention. Can we expect to see more implosions?
I think when a conflict such as that in Afghanistan happens, it is often convenient to vilify one particular group and blame everything on that group.
Yeah.
So in Afghanistan, it's Transparency International just, I think, published its report last week, where Afghanistan is third from the bottom in terms of corruption. Now, in this corrupt system, whatever happens by whomever is automatically blamed on the Taliban. The police is corrupt. The military is corrupt and exclusive in a certain way. When you go to any government office, to most government offices, and by the way, I have an article on this one too, Afghanistan, where
they have your website.
Right, the readers could check that. Afghanistan, where chaos is king and plunder is privilege. That really shows the degree of corruption, but of course it's very convenient to blame everything on the Taliban because they don't have a spokesperson. Now, I don't think the shooting of the girl in Peshawar is any worse than the shooting of another girl in Kapisa province in Afghanistan. Now, pretty much the same thing happened in Kapisa. A girl about the same age was shot and killed, but this was in a non-Pashtun area and we did not hear a thing about it.
Where was she shot?
Crime. Well, she was shot, I think, either because she was either participating in some kind of a campaign, either for literacy or it was for vaccination or some such thing, which would have meant that it was bringing modernity, at least to her own village. The situations are identical, except that the culprit in one case was Pashtun, which is the targeted group. So that one got, global attention. Whereas in the other case, it was a non-Pashtun village. We did not hear. A similar case happened a few months before, where a woman was shot in broad daylight, and it was the incident was recorded on a cell phone, and then sent around the world. And again, this heinous crime happened in broad daylight, but it happened in a non-Pashtun area. And it was initially automatically blamed on the Taliban. But there were no Taliban, because when you watch the video, I mean, you hear the people speaking. These are just basically ignorant villagers who took the law into their own hand and whatever stupidity they believed in. And they shot the girl right in the village square. So I think there's not that one crime is any worse than the other. In essence, it's a bad thing as it is. But we publicize the ones where we can get some political what do we call
capital
it?
or something.
Capital out of the manipulation of the event.
I know you write a lot about an ethnically balanced Afghanistan where you have true representation. I think your answer about the having a state where all people are represented or feel represented. You wrote in an article, NATO's third alternative in Afghanistan. Your critique, what you just said, is that the system that's been placed in Afghanistan so far has been ethnically based. And what you want, the alternative, is to have an ethnically balanced alternative. This comes on, the talk that the United States will be withdrawing, NATO will withdraw. Is it still 2014, or is it earlier, sooner than expected? And is it 2000?
I think, not that I believe it, but yeah, that's what they say.
I'll get to that point, actually. I'll ask you about that too. But at this point, can you elaborate on the idea of establishing an ethnically balanced system in Afghanistan, particularly when it comes to the military and the military side of it?
Well, the military side is the worst part of it, because the new quote-unquote national Afghan army is primarily an ethnic army of the ethnic minorities of the north, in which the most critical part is that the officer corps is 70% from one small valley. 70% of the officer corps in the Afghan National Army, it doesn't even come from an ethnic minority. It comes from a minority within a minority within a minority, from one narrow valley, the Panjshir Valley.
Why is that? I mean,
because they were because the Minister of Defense
is from that region.
Was from there, and because they were at the forefront of the U.S. invasion force from the north, because they had also the support of Iran before the United States got involved in it.
Alliance,
so that the ethnic card was played, and because of that, the structure of the military is off balance. The second thing is that the Pashtun majority is underrepresented. And so on top of this, then we have also the ghost soldier factor, which is in many of these minority areas, the commanders, regional commanders, simply present a list to the government of how many soldiers they have, and they collect the salary. And just like the insurance fraud in the United States, I mean the Social Security fraud in the United States, there are a lot of times that money is collected by the officers, the senior officers, and the people on the paper are just names, because it gives them a quota. And this quota is further promulgated by establishing new provinces for regions in the country that do not even have sufficient minimum population for that region, that valley, that area to become a province, because then there comes the provincial quotas. So in that sense, the corruption that is prevalent is a systemic corruption.
Okay.
And oppose this to let's say the Pashtun majority, who are not only is the region in the south in a state of war, but also there is an idea of underrepresentation, and this underrepresentation is partly the result of the elections that were held at the time of war, where the Taliban, who were trying to boycott the election, were threatening Pashtun candidates from running. So then the minority representatives ended up representing the majorities in the provinces because they were the only ones who could run.
Yeah.
And so it's lopsided in that way too. So I think in order for the United States to leave Afghanistan, if it ever does, and that's where I was expressing my doubt earlier, then what is necessary is that to make sure they do not repeat the mistakes of the Soviets.
Speaking of that, the article that Tom Chanker had talks about how when the Soviet Union left, they had the foreign minister that I'm sure Nazi has suggested to have 10,000 to 15,000 staying there to sort of ensure that the security will prevail, that there will not be chaos or vacuum. But instead, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything become chaotic. In the United States, there is a move towards leaving about 10,000 to 15,000. Is that, are we following, are we doing it the right way that the Soviet Union at the time thought they were doing it?
I think the New York Times article by Shankar, it has major flaws, and the flaws are in the analogy. The analogy is that when the Soviets were leaving, they had no interest whatsoever in making sure that Afghanistan is at peace. Instead, they want an Afghanistan embroiled in a civil war so that they would not be a threat to their Central Asian republics. The United States' interests are the complete opposite. We want a peaceful Afghanistan so there is no second 9/11 or a blowback of one sort or another that will be a threat to the United States or the United States' interests in the region. So this is the first problem with his analogy. The second, and of course they often disregard the analysis of Afghans, fearing that they would not have an objective perspective on the issue, but then they are missing a whole deal because they don't know the foreign analysts do not know the internal politics of, of Afghanistan. The other thing is that in the case of the Soviet Union, their foreign policy establishment, whatever that was under the Soviet system, along with the Red Army, the military side of it, there was no conflict. Whereas in the case of the United States, oftentimes it has happened, like in two of the articles that I have written on my website, where the Pentagon undermines the diplomatic efforts of the State Department. So as much as the State Department wants to have a negotiation, some sort of a peace agreement in Afghanistan, that opportunity is lost because the Pentagon intervenes, because peace has no dividend for the military. You don't get any medals by sitting at the table negotiating peace, but you gain medals by going to the battlefield.
We'll come back to that in a second, but Gerardo, I know we have only a few more minutes to go back. Gerardo wants to take us back to the issue of women's rights. He asks, or he comments, do you think women's rights in Afghanistan will completely disappear when the US gets out?
I would ask Gerard the same question. Do you think that there was a burqa burning celebration when the United States went in? The state of the women's rights, civil rights in general, but the women's right has not changed one bit, except in areas where they can create a facade. For instance, in the parliament, they have created a quota of having at least 25% of the membership for the women, for women deputies, which is a wonderful thing. But you talk to those 25% women, nobody listens to them. And in the presence of those 25% women, that same parliament that we have endorsed, that we have encouraged to bring to power, have passed laws that are so totally un-Islamic and uncivil and discriminate against women. And I wouldn't go to the details of it. So the facade is there, but in reality, it's only, I would say, relative improvement. And if the United States leaves, the Afghan society would be able to take care of it, except that if we leave after we have righted the wrong. And as I said, the critical thing is that if the United States leaves as the situation is now, we will have a bloody civil war, probably worse than Rwanda, because the ethnic dimension is going to be activated by the regional powers that want to manipulate the crisis. The United States would not have any interest to go back, or stamina, or the Congress would not have any interest in going back, and Afghanistan would be left into its own demise. And in a country where the stability is not guaranteed, and you arm only one group as opposed to the rest, what is going to happen? Well, it's a formula for disaster.
Let me ask you straightforward, and we have only 2 or 3 minutes to finish this. The Shankar writes, quoting a professor, Mark Katz, the main thing the Soviets did right was that they continued large-scale military assistance to the regime. Am I hearing you to say that the only way for Afghanistan to remain, to avoid this crisis, is to the United States to get out in ways that would sort of even leave large-scale military? Would that be acceptable?
Any foreign presence in Afghanistan will not be accepted by the general public.
How would you do it? How would we?
Well, what they will do is they will use the puppet government, and the president of Afghanistan is coming next week to the United States. They will have plans to sign a treaty, an agreement with that government, but that government has no legitimacy.
That's the same thing they did with Iraq. Are you talking about the agreement?
Right. Yeah. So they will have, and the Soviets did the same thing with the regime that they had installed there. Yeah. So the thing is that is not going to last. Now, what will the consequences be? That's a little bit of a crystal ball. But the point is that if we want any stability, even a semi-legitimate government in Afghanistan can be left, so long as no group is left disenfranchised, so long as there is at least a modicum of a representation as far as the ethnic balance goes.
I have to let it there, Dr. Zaman. Stanizai, it's a pleasure having you. It's always interesting.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm honored.